So interesting times, interesting times. Firstly, I have to say I was quite surprised that I was still being invited to come and speak here in the beginning, just because based on recent media coverage of Brexit, I understood that nobody was really interested in key facts or figures anymore, and that so-called experts, people were tired of hearing from them. So I'm here to set the scene. And really to give everybody an overview of the hotel performance landscape, firstly from a global perspective, and then really drilling down to Europe and further down to the UK, as I know that's where a lot of you have your focus. And just a bit of background around why there should be some validity or cadence to what I'm about to say. The reason I can talk about hotel performance is that at STR, we benchmark the hotel performance of more than 54,000 hotels every day. That's more than 7.3 million rooms across the world in 110 different countries and over 2,000 markets. And we've been doing this for more than 30 years now, so we've got a bit of a track record. As you can see, obviously the US, most established hotel market out there in terms of branded hotels, so that's where we have a lot of our coverage, but here in Europe, more than 1.2 million rooms. So just to start off and give everybody an overview of the global performance picture. I think as you can see, this is RevPAR change year to date to May. It really is a mixed picture. We've got our established developed markets in North America, where we've seen RevPAR, which has been booming ahead at more than 5 to 8% growth for the last 5 years, really slowed down in the last 6 months and seems to now have stabilized around that 3% level. Europe, on the contrary, overtook the US in terms of growth last year. It's also stabilized a bit this year, but is still about a percentage point there ahead of North America. Moving further down to Central America and South America, okay performance, but South America really flattered by quite a high level of inflation there. Moving across to Middle East, quite a big decline there. A lot of that supply driven, which you'll see now. And North Africa, quite interestingly, down only about 4%. That's with markets like Cairo actually coming back quite strongly, offsetting declines in the resort markets of Sharm el-Sheikh. Southern Africa, 8% growth there, and that's really driven all by South Africa, where there's been continued strong performance last year and this year because of the devaluation of the rand there. Which has driven not only inbound international tourism, because it's become effectively buy one, get one free on your holidays there, but also grown domestic tourism because it's become so much more expensive to travel out to foreign currencies. And so just thinking ahead to forecasts and where markets are going, I think bear that in mind when you think about the UK, and that there is some positivity for the UK hotel market in terms of the devaluation of sterling. Moving across to Asia, it's a bit of a mixed picture, but flat overall, and Australia doing reasonably well with 4% growth. So we always like to go back and look at the fundamental sort of economic principles of hotel performance, which is it's all about demand and supply. And really the key takeaways from this, if you look at North America, the reason why performance has really slowed down there is for the first time in 6 years, supply has overtaken demand growth. And therefore, even though occupancies are at all-time high levels, hoteliers are really struggling to grow rate. And it's become all the more and more important to focus on how you distribute your rooms and how you mitigate and reduce your distribution costs, which I think talks to the increasing importance of events like this. In Europe, I think you'll see there the reason why we're continuing to do reasonably well is because supply growth remains quite benign. It's below 1%, and it's forecast to continue that way for some time. The only markets that are really struggling from a demand perspective, Africa, and particularly North Africa, and South America because of the political disruption there. Just touching on future supply, so pipeline, kind of as I said there, if you look at the picture, this shows the percentage growth in supply if all of the current pipeline gets built over the next 3 to 5 years. The one that really stands out is obviously the Middle East, more than 50% growth there, which is the real challenge that the market's dealing with at the moment. Across to the US, it's actually quite a high level of pipeline there, especially when you compare it to Europe, which, as I said, at 3% is relatively benign. So just drilling down to Europe, I think to start off with, a pretty solid start to the year. Occupancy continuing to grow, and rate growth, 2.5% doesn't sound that fantastic, but when you compare it to inflation of 0%, it's not that bad. And certainly for the market as a whole to continue to achieve rate growth levels of that magnitude and for the foreseeable future wouldn't be a bad thing. So as I said, it's been supply, benign. Demand has been more than that, which has driven occupancy with good rate growth, has driven RevPAR and ultimate good market growth. Europe has now been growing RevPAR for more than 70 months, which is almost 6 years. So despite a bit of a wobble in 2011-12, it really has continued to grow quite strongly. I guess the interesting thing about this year is really this chart, which is some analysis that we really only started to show this month. And that is that we've seen quite a strong return of group demand to Europe. And that demand has really come through in 3 areas. It's come through to the Euromed, so unsurprisingly, given a lot of the African resort markets are less appealing at the moment because of safety concerns. We've seen an increased demand driving to Spain, Italy, the south of France, and that really is at the moment coming through group bookings. So in those markets, we're seeing group up north of 20%. And that is a mix of both rate and occupancy growth. So some good double-digit occupancy rate growth coming through there. So I think an interesting thing for everybody to think about is, as we see the landscape change, as we see the growth of this group market in the European market, how do you play that against your direct bookings, and how do you make sure that you're attracting people to book with you direct instead of through groups? Just looking at the markets, this is year-to-date RevPAR performance across some of the major cities in Europe. And unsurprisingly, 2 things. First of all, there's a lot of green there. So most markets are having a pretty good time, and the ones that aren't are the ones you'd expect. And it's the ones where the impact of terrorist attacks are clearly visible. So the biggest being Paris, Brussels, Istanbul, and London catching some of the flack of that, even though there hasn't been something here. It certainly has driven back demand. So we did quite a bit of analysis on the impact of terrorist events earlier this year, going right back to the 7/7 bombings in London and the Madrid train bombings back in 2005. And the interesting thing that we noticed is actually the hotel market has been more resilient than you would think against these kind of events. What we saw was that it took typically only about 3 months for hotel performance to stabilize, for occupancies to stop declining, and for rates to stabilize. It would then take another year to recover that lost performance, but it took about 3 months for it to stabilize. And that was what we were seeing in Paris and Brussels this year until the second Brussels terror attack. It's still too soon to tell how long it will take that to work out, but I think we remain confident that the underlying hotel market is more robust than people think. Just looking at some of the metrics underpinning that from an occupancy and rate perspective, I think just the key things to point out here, almost all markets seeing occupancy declines except those that were impacted by terror, and some good rate increases coming through across those major markets. From a pipeline perspective, again, not that much pipeline except for really Germany and the UK. Those are the only 2 European countries that have seen significant supply growth. Just diving into the UK then, I think first thing that I always find that it probably isn't that well understood about the UK hotel market is just how robust it is. Average occupancies here are about 7 percentage points higher than they are in Europe. So it's a much less cyclical market, and it is really a very profitable hotel market across the world comparisons. So far, not been a great year, and that's really been all about London. And this shows London change, and you can see 2016, when you've got consistent supply growth of between 3 to 4%, as we have had for the last 6 years, if demand doesn't keep up with that, which it hasn't this year, it's dipped back, then you are going to get some performance declines. Looking at the regional UK, 2015 was a really positive year. I think everybody's been caught a bit off guard this year. That demand hasn't been as strong as we all expected. And as a result, the only growth that has come through has really been through rate growth of just about 2 to 3%. Looking at some of the major markets, it really is, again, quite a diverse picture. We've got the Midlands doing reasonably well. London going backwards, as I said. Aberdeen really having quite a big adjustment there, and that adjustment's been going on for 2.5 years now. So it is really market dependent. Just looking at which segments are doing well and which are doing less well. In London, it's really been the luxury segment that has sort of had the brunt of the decline there. On the occupancy side, which is the blue bars, with pretty much all the other sectors having around 2% occupancy declines. And as a result, limited rate growth across those segments. In the regional UK, slightly different story. All segments showing rate growth, so being able to achieve rate growth despite relatively static occupancies. So just on to forecasts. So we produced these back in May, which basically means you can rip them up. It's too soon to tell really what the impact of Brexit will be, mostly because nobody knows how it's going to play out properly yet. But I would say three things. Firstly, hotel performance, and particularly UK hotel performance, but also wider European hotel performance, is incredibly closely correlated to wider economic performance, to GDP. In any analysis you run, you can see the correlation is close. So if, as many economists forecast, there is a downturn in the economy, then you can expect that will hurt the hotel market. However, as I said before, the UK has a lot of inbound international tourism, particularly London, and a devaluation of sterling like we have seen is likely to shore that decline up. So I think you could see a short-term positive impact as we become a relatively cheaper destination, also as it becomes more expensive for UK citizens to travel abroad. And that last point is important because what a lot of people don't realize is that the UK, or maybe they realize it, but not the extent of it, is that the UK is an incredibly important outward bound tourist market to Europe. So the UK every year has about 220,000 nights, occupied nights in terms of tourism. Half of that was within the UK and half of it is outside of the UK. So it's about 100,000 nights in European markets. And that represents a very significant proportion of demand for European hotels. If you go to a market like Cyprus, UK accounts for about 30% of tourist arrivals. In markets like Spain and Portugal, 15% of tourist arrivals. Even in France and Germany and the Netherlands, it's up there 5 to 8%. So I think it's the really interesting thing to look at is going to be how this plays out in terms of the governments working together to ensure that we can continue to have the kind of trade relationships that we've had so that that isn't disrupted. So there you go. So I just had 15 minutes. That was setting the scene. I don't know if we've got any time for any questions. Charlie?
Yes, absolutely.
Sure.
No one wants the power socks. I'm ashamed.
Andrew.
Quick question. In terms of this devaluation piece, because thank you, Andrew Sangster, hotel analyst. That's my company, not what I do. In terms of, there was another firm who got eggs on their faces in the financial crash in 2009 in terms of their forecasts, because they thought London was going to go to hell in a handbasket because of this correlation between GDP. It didn't play out that way, and that was largely, in my view, because of the devaluation, and we saw this huge influx of people coming across from continental Europe. Surely that's going to happen this time around, given that the pound has fallen more than it did back then.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as I said, that is one of the positive things for the industry. I guess the real question is this time, does anybody want to travel to the UK? Or do they feel unwelcome? But no, that should help, but that will help London probably more than it helps the regions. If you go back to the financial crisis and the impact on the regional UK, that was quite severe. It really was London that was protected by the weak sterling, because it is an internationally recognized and desirable location. So.
Thank you. As things unfold and you get more data, is it easy? Is there any on your website? Can people get their monthly updates? Because no doubt this is something worth tracking closely.
Yeah, I think the best thing to do, website's always so static. The best thing to do is, go on to LinkedIn, go onto Twitter, and sign up to STR, and we regularly have news feeds where we tell people what's going on in the market. So, watch that space.
Great.
Very good.
Thank you very
Thanks,
much.
Charlie.